Hey there. Welcome to the Ofrenda. My name is Nicholas Gonzalez. Thanks for coming over. Each episode, we'll get the chance to meet someone new who may not be able to introduce themselves anymore through the stories and memories shared here. This episode is going to be a little different. I don't have a guest with me, so fortunately you'll have to just stick around with me for a little bit. But I wanted to do this episode a little differently. I know for a lot of people, when we think about loss and grief, we tend to think about relatives who have passed away, or good friends, mentors, people who we knew kind of outside of our life who came in at some point and left. But loss can also mean a lot of different things. It can mean losing someone who is still around, but our relationship with them has changed. They may not be necessarily the same person who we knew at the beginning, and so over time, we realize that we don't really know who they are anymore. That happens a lot, and most of the time, we're able to kind of move forward and be fine with it. There may be some grief over time, there may be some confusion, but I don't think many of us actually take the time to actually consider it as a loss of an individual. So that being said, I want to introduce to everyone someone who I knew for a very long time and who has moved on, and kind of let you know what she was like. Some of you guys who are listening may know who this is, and maybe a little confused by my wording, but trust me, hang in there, it'll make sense eventually. So, I want to introduce Miriam Gonzalez. She was the oldest of 6 kids. In fact, she was in the older group of kids, of cousins. They were always hanging out together and was someone who cared about a lot of people. She enjoyed being around people, even though she was very introverted and very shy. So it was sometimes hard to get to know her for that reason, but when you did take the time, she was very fun, very enthusiastic about wanting to get to know people, wanting to learn from people. She loved animals and always wanted to actually be one. One of her favorite movies growing up was actually The Lion King. And I remember one time she was watching The Lion King and actually started going around in her room pretending to be a lion. And the scene, for those of you who remember, I know it's an older movie, but still a classic. The scene where Simba is running in the desert slow motion was something that she wanted to try and do. So she got on the edge of the bed and tried to go from one end of the bed to the other in slow motion run, but wasn't very athletic, and so lost her balance and ended up actually falling off the bed and hitting her head really bad, to the point where her parents ran in and had to figure out, like, what was going on. And they came in and saw her on the floor crying, and they asked her what happened, and she said, I fell off. I wanted to just be a lion, but I couldn't do it. And so as the oldest of 6, she kind of had to be the mature one all the time. And for the most part, she was fine with it. She didn't really have an issue with taking orders and following through. She did, however, deal with a lot of pressure as the eldest in her family. So that kind of affected her later on in life. She always wanted to do her best. And so that kind of forced her to always want to be the best in every situation. And she tried to do that in school. She did her best to excel in all of her classes, never get in trouble, never really do anything to cause issues. That kind of, in a way, led into a lot of not really getting involved with people. She was sometimes afraid to get too close to people for the fear of just causing problems, and it was kind of hard sometimes. She grew up not really being able to be herself, and so ended up actually copying a lot of people around her. She would get involved in different groups whenever possible and kind of almost mimic those around her in a way to be comfortable around them and have them be comfortable around her. She did chess club. She hung around with different groups of kids during recess and lunch. She did play soccer and wasn't very good at it, but still had a lot of fun. I remember she spent a lot of time reading fantasy. She loved to enter another world and see what it was like. I think for her, she loved the idea of seeing what other people's lives were like because she wanted to get to know other people. And I think deep down she wanted to be someone else than who she really was. She was confused for a long time as to why she never felt like she could fit in, why whenever she tried to reach out and connect with others, it felt disjointed almost. Over time, she did get to meet some great friends and got to be involved in, she actually got involved in theater towards the end of high school. And how she got into that was actually kind of interesting. She was never an actress. She had terrible stage fright. I think anytime she had to speak out, even in class, she would just start shaking and kind of feel like everyone was just digging their eyes into her and kind of judging her. So she never wanted to be on stage. However, a lot of the people that she connected with were very much extroverted. They were the kind of people that were more comfortable being seen all the time. And they were the ones who would sing and dance and play all these different characters. And she loved just being around that environment, that kind of creative place where you just do whatever you want to and see what happens. And while she couldn't necessarily do that, she would help out in any way that she could in those situations. She actually grew up using power tools and being comfortable with construction and being able to do, a lot of different things. So she started working backstage and kind of helping out in that way. And at the same time, she was good in the more academic subjects of school. And so she would actually help out her friends study and get assignments done while they were rehearsing or getting ready for something. So she ended up spending a lot of time in the theater because of that. The professor at the high school, I can't remember her name, but she went up to her one day and asked, "You really like hanging around a lot of people over here. Do you want to be on stage?" And she flat out said no. Yeah, there was no way she was going to do that. But the teacher asked, "Well, do you want to be involved in some way?" And so she started helping out in building the sets and kind of running things backstage. She was a very organized person. She was fine with calendars and setting up schedules, setting up spreadsheets and all that. And so she ended up learning what a stage manager is For those of you who may not know, they're basically kind of the information hub for productions. They talk with the actors, talk with directors, talk with designers, and kind of organize and make sure everyone's communicating with each other. They collect all of the information from other places and make sure it's spread out to the people who need it. And so she ended up filling out that role and just kind of enjoyed the environment that she could be a part of without feeling like she was pressured to do more than she could. Over time, she got more and more involved, ended up actually going to school for theater and got her degree, and was just able to move forward with all of that. One of the things for her that, as she got older, was actually learning about the LGBTQ community, being raised in a very conservative state and upbringing. She didn't really know what it was like to actually be gay or lesbian or queer or trans or anything. And so through theater, she actually met a lot of people who were a part of that community. And she was able to actually learn quite a bit of what it was like to be outside of the norm in that situation. And the more that she learned about it, the more she started questioning herself and realized, I think I might be a part of this community. And so she ended up actually coming out to her parents and to her friends as bi, and has had an interesting journey in that situation. Over time, she realized that she wasn't really who she should be. She kind of didn't really feel like she was living her true, authentic self, and so had to actually take some time and talk with others around her. And it was actually back in, I believe, 2013 or 14, she actually met someone who was trans and got to know what that experience was like. The more time she talked with this individual, his name was actually Sandy. The more time she talked with Sandy, the more she started to actually understand what was going on inside of her. And after questioning, she didn't know how she could stay necessarily in this life as Miriam. One thing about Miriam that I don't think she ever got over was the fear to let go. She was always afraid of standing out and hurting people, and so she had this tendency to kind of latch on and hold them as tight as possible. I think she was just afraid of, if she were to let go of someone, they wouldn't stick around and would just leave unexpectedly. I know that growing up, she didn't have a lot of initial positive experiences with trusting people. And so that kind of fed into her mentality of, if I like someone, I have to reach out and keep them as close as possible. Otherwise, if I let go, they'll disappear. That kind of fed into her mindset with everything, where if she let go of a person, if she let go of an identity, if she let go of a place or anything like that, it would disappear and nothing would be left. Over time, that became harder and harder for her to do. As she got older, she realized that she couldn't really stay, at least here on Earth, in the way that she was right now. It was too painful to stay and stick around. After some time, she met with doctors and a psychiatrist to try and figure out what was going on. She looked up and did her own research and realized that she couldn't stick around as Miriam anymore and had to leave. Watching her realize this was very painful. She was confused and hurt a lot. She wasn't sure why she had to leave. She didn't understand that letting go was going to benefit everyone and was actually going to help her out a lot. She tried to every now and then kind of step back and let others grow around her and to actually go through and complete the changes that she needed to. But anytime she got scared, she would kind of go and twice as hard to stick around. I think for her, she was just afraid to be alone. I think a lot of us have that fear of being alone, of waking up one day and suddenly realizing that everything that you had built up around you is gone and it wasn't true or anything like that. And so you have to start all over, which means that you have to start by yourself sometimes. And so for her, realizing that she had to start all over and let go of everyone around her, she was afraid of what that would mean. She was afraid of the pain. She was afraid of what leaving would bring. She took a long time to pass away, and every time I saw her slowly die, it was painful to see, but at the same time I knew it was something that had to happen. Going through and watching her, I just wanted to hold her every time she got scared and just say, it'll be fine. It'll be okay. You know, whenever you see a loved one in pain, you always want to try and comfort them. You always want to try and say that everything's going to be fine. And in reality, you don't always know that. You don't always know what's going to happen in the future. And sometimes you may not need to reach out and tell them anything because it's not what needs to be said. I think the thing with Miriam was she needed to learn to be okay with the unknown, which is hard for a lot of people, but whenever you do step out and kind of accept things as they are, I've learned over time it's so much more gratifying and rewarding than to just hold on to something that you know isn't going to last. And I know for Miriam that was scary. Every now and then I'll be reminded of her, and it's usually in some of the Stranger Things. Whenever I see a new book series announced for fantasy or anything else, I'm reminded of her sitting in the school library, surrounded by 3 or 4 books, kind of in the corner, and just devouring all of those books. She would just absorb all of the books and get to know each of the characters fully. And in each series that she did, she could very easily tell you who each character was, what their likes and dislikes were, what their struggles were, what they felt like, and just connect with them in a way that a lot of people don't do nowadays. And so, yeah, whenever I see like a fantasy series or like a young adult series pop up, I'm just kind of reminded of her in that way. Another thing that reminds me of her is music. She loved all music. It didn't matter the genre. It could be like some sappy Spanish song, or it could be some hard rock, or it could be some classical music, or anything like that. She could listen to all of it and just kind of disappear and into her own world while listening to it. And yeah, it was always entertaining to see how she could find a new song or something and just listen to it on repeat for hours and hours on end. But yeah, when she did pass away, when she did actually leave, it was actually December of this year. I was going in for top surgery, and the night before, I actually had a dream of her, and I kind of talked to her for a bit and let her know that everything was going to be okay, that the changes that are happening are going to take some time, and some of the changes will hurt, but in the end, they're necessary. And she kind of just sat and was quiet for a while, and then looked at me and said, "Are you going to be able to be okay on your own?" And I kind of had to sit there for a moment and realize I wasn't sure. No one is really ready to strive out on their own necessarily always. You can prepare, and you can definitely, get a checklist and go through your list twice and make sure that everything is taken care of. But there's always that racing of your heart when you take those first few steps. And that little voice in your head will always pop up and say, "Are you sure? Are you sure that this is going to be the right step? Are you sure that you took care of everything? Are you sure that this is actually going to work?" And so, listening to her and trying to come up with an answer, I couldn't really answer her right away. After my surgery, I kept seeing her in a lot of dreams and in a lot of nightmares where she was in a lot of pain, and I couldn't figure out a way to help her. And after several restless nights of these nightmares, I realized that they were all circling around her leaving and me not allowing her to pass on. I was scared to let her die as well, as much as she was scared to die. I sat down after weeks of these nightmares one day and just had to think about what was going on. Why did I keep having these nightmares? And I realized that it was because I never actually said goodbye. I told her that everything was going to be fine, but I never actually said the words goodbye. And I think a lot of us, whenever we lose someone, either unexpectedly or even when we know with some time, that seems to be the one thing that we always want to do. We always want to say goodbye to the person. I don't know why, but it seems to provide more closure with those words. And so I sat down and I brought her up again in my mind, and I told her goodbye. I thanked her for all of the fun memories. I thanked her for teaching me how to dance, for showing me all of the fun things that I could create, and for introducing me to some of the best people I've ever known in my life. And I said goodbye, and that next night was the first time I could sleep. I still miss her, and I know there are still a lot of people out there who miss her and don't really accept necessarily that she's gone. I know it's hard to accept someone who you may have known for all their life to suddenly be gone, or who you were very close to and cared about. I know people who have a hard time accepting that she's not around and that they can't call her anymore or talk to her like they used to. But I don't think she's necessarily completely gone. There are still parts of her that are around. There are definitely still memories of her that won't go away, for better or worse, depending on your memory of her. So now I try to find different ways to honor her memory. I have artwork of her still up I still have connections with people who knew her, and sometimes it can be a little strained, just because of some of the memories that do come up. But I think in taking the time to remember who she was, it helps heal others into moving forward in a life without her being around. There's kind of an overall belief that I have that nothing is really gone completely. It's kind of based on the, I guess, scientific view of materials, of matter and energy, neither of which can be created or destroyed. They're just changed. And I kind of interpret that also in people. No one is ever really gone. They just change in different ways. And for some people, it's a bit more permanent, I guess. When someone does pass away, they're not physically there anymore, but they're changed into memories and sights and sounds around us. They're changed into different thoughts that pop in your head every now and then. That's why sometimes I believe that Miriam is not really destroyed or gone. She's just changed. She's changed into me. In recognizing that that change has happened is, I think, a beautiful thing. One of the things in the trans community that is always kind of repeated is a lot of trans people identify with the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly, where a creature starts in one form and then suddenly they have to shelter down and take some time within themselves, and then they emerge as something completely different. And while that outward initial appearance may look like that butterfly is not at all related to the little caterpillar that was wiggling around earlier, that caterpillar is still inside that butterfly. They're still present in another way, but you still wouldn't call a butterfly a caterpillar anymore. They're not the same thing. And in that same way that you wouldn't call a butterfly a caterpillar anymore, I no longer go by Miriam. I go by Nicholas now. My transition has been tricky, to say the least. Going through and recognizing in the first place that I was trans was something that has taken me quite a while to understand and process. It's been an ongoing journey. It's still something that I am doing, and I think I will honestly continue to do for the rest of my life. I don't think it's something that will ever stop, simply because I, like all of us, am always changing. I'm always learning more about me and kind of stepping forward and showing others more of who I am in that same regard. It's not easy to be constantly changing, and I know it can be hard for some of the people closest to me to understand that even though I'm physically changing, even though a lot of things are different than how things were, the core of who I am is still the same. It's actually been kind of interesting meeting people who don't know who Miriam was. They never got to know the shy, quiet girl who was constantly in the background and observing everyone. They never saw her dance at her quinceañera. They never got to do all-nighters working on school projects and trying to keep each other awake as the sun's coming up so that no one misses class. And because of that, it's actually been interesting explaining to people, I guess, that I am trans. There are some who see me as just a guy, and as much as I appreciate that, it's interesting and a little strange to be seen as just a guy, because I'm not. I know what it's like to be a woman. I know what it's like to experience cramps and have to deal with the emotional and physical roller coasters of periods. I know the fears that women have, the fears of walking down the street by themselves. I know what it's like to be treated as different simply because you're seen as a weaker sex, or you're seen as someone who shouldn't be involved in this or that. I know what it's like to be treated differently because of something you can't control. Unfortunately, a lot of women still experience prejudice. They experience misogyny. And so it's something that I try and keep in mind whenever I do interact with others. Going through with my transition, there are definitely things that I have changed and have asked people to change along with me. But I think now I'm at an interesting point where I'm asking people to still remember who I was and what I've gone through. So I just wanted to take some time today and introduce you all to who Miriam was and who I was. I know some of you who are listening may remember me as her. I appreciate those who have come through and have been on my journey with letting go of her and accepting me as who I am now. I think kind of the overall lesson I've learned from letting Miriam go is recognizing that you do need to take time to grieve people who leave, but you need to also take time to reflect on who you are now and who you want to be. Sometimes in order for life to continue, there has to be some death. Thank you all for listening. I know this is probably a little different than the usual ones. It's interesting to grieve someone who, in a way, has passed on. Maybe not in the traditional way that a lot of us think, but it's still necessary to grieve them. Thank you all for stopping by and meeting Miriam. Feel free to rate and subscribe. If you want to reach out and share your own stories, feel free to email us at storiesattheofrenda@gmail.com. And you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at storiesattheofrenda. Be safe out there, and we'll see you all soon. Te quiero.